So once we know a little bit about right triangles, right, and SOHCAHTOA and Pythagorean's theorem, we can come up with some kind of neat things. Okay, let's say we're looking at this triangle with respect to this angle. Then the opposite side would be here, the hypotenuse would be here, the adjacent side would be here. Now, Pythagorean's theorem says that if this is true, then opposite squared plus adjacent squared is going to equal the hypotenuse squared. Alright, then mathematically, if I divide everything by the hypotenuse squared, what happens? Well, we can see what happens on the left side, right? That's just going to be opposite squared over hypotenuse squared plus adjacent squared over hypotenuse squared. But on the right side, we cancel out to 1. Well, where does that lead us? What does that mean? How can we use that? Well, SOHCAHTOA says that the sine of an angle is always going to equal the opposite divided by hypotenuse. SOHCAHTOA, S-O-H, sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Alright, well, what if we squared both sides here? What if we took sine, squared it, then we'd have to square this side. So we would get sine of theta squared, and they put the when you square a function, the squared goes right after the three letters and before the angle. It's just kind of convention. But it would equal opposite squared over hypotenuse squared. So it would equal this right here. All right. Well, what about cosine? Cosine of an angle using SOHCAHTOA, it would be the C-A-H part. Cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Again, what would happen if we squared it? What would happen if we squared cosine, and this time I'll just put it right there, and we squared the other side? Okay, just the same as we did here. If we square the whole thing, it's the same as squaring the top and squaring the bottom. Okay, so we're going to have a squared equals h squared. Well, that is this right here. So what I'm trying to get at is if opposite squared over hypotenuse squared plus adjacent squared over hypotenuse squared equals 1, and sine squared equals this, and cosine squared equals this, then logically it follows that sine squared of an angle plus cosine squared of an angle also must equal 1. Okay, this is the proof for why sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. We won't use this a lot in this lesson, but we will use it in later lessons.